Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this December 30, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Indonesian officials have confirmed that bodies and debris found in the Java Sea of Borneo are from AirAsia flight QZ8501, a flight that went missing on Sunday, and this statement comes from AirAsia. AirAsia CEO Tony Fernandez said he was devastated by the news. President Joko Widodo told media he had instructed all search teams to focus on finding the passengers and crew. The Airbus A320-200 carrying 172 people from Surabaya in Indonesia to Singapore disappeared on Sunday. The head of Indonesia's search operation, Bambang Solistio, says 3 bodies have been retrieved, not 40 as previously stated by naval officials. And friends, there's a photograph from today's news on this. I believe we do have a video story on it too. No, not on this one. Okay, I'm sure we'll be having video by tomorrow night. It's kind of a mix of good news, bad news. Good news, we found the missing jet. The bad news, double bad news. It not only crashed, but it crashed with what appears to be all of the passengers having been killed. News today, as you can see in the background for the next news story, friends, the picture from Jerusalem relates to this. The UN Security Council rejects Palestinian resolution. The resolution called for East Jerusalem to be the capital of a future Palestinian state. The UN Security Council has rejected that resolution, demanding an end to the Israeli quote-unquote occupation of the Palestinian territories within 3 years. Jordan submitted the motion after it had been agreed upon by 22 Arab states and the Palestinian Authority. 8 members of the 15-strong Security Council voted for it, while the U.S. and Australia voted against it. The resolution, condemned by Israel as a gimmick, needed the support of at least 9 members in order to pass. And we do have video on this story, friends. The caption for this news story reads, Jordan's Dina Kawar says, we hope that this loss... Well, you know what? I don't want to quote her. You're going to hear her say it yourself. Let's go to the video.
We voted against this resolution not because we are comfortable with the status quo. We voted against it because we know what everyone here knows as well. Peace will come from hard choices and compromises that must be made at the negotiating table. Today's staged confrontation in the UN Security Council will not bring the parties closer to achieving a 2-state solution.
Friends, I'm only cutting out on that story early for a couple of reasons, actually. Let me give you a little better lead-in on that. The caption was a little misleading somehow, I think. Maybe we've got a photograph of a different order or something. Let's see. But what I'm going to do is recycle that, and I noticed the volume was not what it should be, and I do have a way. I'll have to do something while that video starts to play where I can get the volume up for you. Let me give you a little better lead in. Even if that resolution had secured the required 9 votes, the United States would have used its veto power to stop the adoption of the resolution. U.S. envoy, now this is who you see pictured behind me, who began speaking in that video with the volume down low. We're going to get her up higher. U.S. envoy Samantha Power said after the vote, "We voted against this resolution, not because," well, I'm going to let you hear her. Why should I read to you what you're going to hear her say in this? And then I'll have commentary on what she said afterward. Bear with me. I'm going to bring her forward. We'll crank up the volume and let her roll. After that, you'll hear her from the beginning of this video report.
We voted against this resolution not because we are comfortable with the status quo. We voted against it because we know what everyone here knows as well. Peace will come from hard choices and compromises that must be made at the negotiating table. Today's staged confrontation in the UN Security Council will not bring the parties closer to achieving a two-state solution. We voted against this resolution not because we are indifferent to the daily hardships or the security threats endured by Palestinians and Israelis, but because we know that those hardships will not cease and those threats will not subside until the parties reach a comprehensive settlement achieved through negotiations.
Okay, friends, and I did make some notes on what she said because I do want to comment on them. I wanted you to hear them in her own voice, especially since we have video on it first. She said, "We voted against this resolution not because we are comfortable with the status quo. We voted against it because peace must come from hard compromises, that occur at the negotiating table. No, that will never happen. Not when you consider how old this animosity is. This animosity is thousands of years old, at least 3,500 years old, goes back to the time of Abraham and Sarah and Sarah's Egyptian handmaid Hagar, whom Sarah had bear a child, got Abraham to go along with this, which was supposed to be born upon her knees and be as if it were fully the child of Sarah. And yet, Hagar acted like any mom reasonably would act. That's my child. And the animosity, the jealousy between Sarah and Hagar became a known fact that is recorded in the Bible. And eventually God said to Abraham, listen to your wife Sarah, do what she says regarding Hagar. And Sarah said, Hagar goes, and that son Ishmael with her. And out they went. But God had mercy upon Hagar and her offspring, one of Abraham's illegitimate sons, yet nonetheless a son God recognized as a son of Abraham, even though he at one place calls Abraham's only legitimate son to be Isaac. And yet God said of Ishmael that he'd make 12 great chiefs of him, and he'd have a certain roaming land, but he'd be a thorn in the side of his half-brother. And where was I going with that? We were saying that, how peace would come. The U.S. envoy said that peace must come from hard compromises that occur at the negotiating table. And I was saying, that animosity that goes back 3,500 years, that'll never be resolved at a negotiating table. That'll only be resolved after Jesus Christ returns and tells the Palestinians, or, the Ishmaelites is a better way to say it, really, when you understand who the Ishmaelites are. They're basically the Arab people. They are the the Palestinian people, basically, just to put it in simple, generic terms. He will tell the descendants of Ishmael that, look, the promise is through Abraham and Isaac's sons, Jacob and his 12 sons, and primarily Joseph, for the blessings of the world. And get in line with it or take a hike. Putting it mildly, or putting it just general, simple terms. That's the way it's going to be. But the only way people are going to recognize that is not hard compromises that occur at a negotiating table. It's going to be hard reality when nations get no reign, when Jesus Christ is reigning and ruling the whole world with his throne in Jerusalem. And that's the way it's going to be. Now, but the current news story, we're not there yet. Jesus Christ hasn't returned yet, and before Jesus Christ returns, we're going to see the restoration of the Holy Roman Empire. The seventh and final head of that empire is going to be crowned by the Pope in a coronation ceremony in Frankfurt, Germany, most likely. That's history repeating itself. That's where it's always been done. The Pope, Holy Roman Empire, involves the Roman Catholic Church crowning an emperor over the whole Holy Roman Empire, which is now in the abyss, has been since 1945, when Mussolini was hung upside down on a canopy of an Esso gasoline station along with his mistress and his comrades on April 28, 1945. He had revived the Holy Roman Empire with a concordant from the Vatican in 1936 when he invaded and conquered Ethiopia. A short-lived revival, 1936 to 1945, but a revival nonetheless, and that fulfilled the prophecy of where Revelation 17:10 says there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is. Now, God was speaking in a future tense when he had John write that down from a vision he had on the Isle of Patmos back in about 90 A.D. He was speaking of a future time that would become a perfect, I think is the way you say it in grammar, tense, where it's speaking of something in the future as if it were right now, as if the future were now, saying 1 is. But that 1 is period of time only existed between 1936 and 1945. That was the 6th head in a short revival of the Holy Roman Empire. You know, right after God says there are 7 kings in verse 10 of Revelation 17, there are 7 kings, he says, and 5 are fallen, and 1 is. Okay, so 5 and 1, that makes 6. The 1 was Mussolini from 1936 to 1945, as God revealed through Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong back in 1936, when Mr. Armstrong had a coast-to-coast broadcast, and broadcast that even boomed further than coast-to-coast, 100,000 watts out of Mexico, getting into Canada even, and telling the world, okay, here it is, the 6th head of the Holy Roman Empire has revived. And then that revival was seen to go back into the pit in 1945 when the head of that 6th head of the Holy Roman Empire was assassinated, killed, hung upside down, again, as I said, from a canopy at an Esso gasoline station in Italy, and along with his mistress and his comrades. And so that put the Holy Roman Empire back into the abyss, back into the pit, from 1936 until in the future. But to a time in a very near point in the future where the rest of Revelation 17 verse 10 says, and it says 5, there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is. Now that 1 was for the period from 1936 to 1945, so whoosh, you know, if we put this verse in today's present tense, we would say 6 are fallen. And then the rest of that verse says, and one is yet to come. That one is yet to come is still a future prophecy. The 5 are fallen, and the one is now past prophecy. 5 are fallen, and the one has fallen, and one is yet to come is still a future prophecy. One is yet to come, and that one that is yet to come will be the 7th and final head of the Holy Roman Empire. He will commence World War III. He will commence the time of Jacob's trouble. It'll be a time of great persecution and martyrdom, much bigger martyrdom than we saw at the time when Fox's Book of Martyrs was written about. It'll make that look like just small play compared to what is coming in a martyrdom and a great tribulation. Time of World War III, time of Jacob's trouble. It'll be the time as Jesus Christ described in Matthew 24, verses 20, 21, 22, the time of great tribulation. A time so bad that it's called the worst since the beginning of the world, and then says, no, nor ever shall be. Nothing in the past has ever been as bad as what's coming, and nothing after that again, thankfully, will never again be as bad. All that's ahead of us when that 7th and final king is selected, appointed, given the power by 10 other kings who submit under him, but who really is reigned over by a woman. Terms, and a woman in the Bible symbolically means a church organization. In this case, though, a false church organization. And as I read to you last night from Revelation 12, verse 9, it says, let's read that verse, and I'll just comment on it again quickly. It's good to keep in mind. Friends, you're watching this program, you're going to eventually perhaps learn something you didn't know before. Verse 9 of Revelation 12 says, and the great dragon. Now, who is this great dragon the Bible's talking about? Well, God's going to tell you right inside this same verse. The Bible interprets itself when it gives symbolism. And in this case, it's not always done this way. Sometimes you've got to look here because God says, I write here a little, there a little, line upon line, precept upon precept. And it's not always in the same verse, not always in the same chapter. Sometimes like putting together a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces are all poured around and mixed up. The Bible is written like a jigsaw puzzle, and to find where the pieces go, you may be flipping here and flipping there. But again, in this one case, this verse tells us who the great dragon is. It says he was cast out, that old serpent. Well, now, who is the old serpent? Well, in this case, we know whoever the great dragon is also the one who was an old serpent. And there was an old serpent in the Garden of Eden who deceived Mother Eve, who is described as being Satan the devil. And this same verse goes on to say that great dragon and that old serpent called the devil and Satan. So here we are in one verse. You don't even need to go back to the Garden of Eden to look up who the old serpent was. This tells you very clearly God wants us to know plainly who he's talking about. He's talking about the one who's called the devil and Satan, who, he goes on to say, and this is the point I want to make, who deceives a person here and a person there. Maybe a few Islamic Muslims he deceives. Friend, it doesn't say that. It says who deceives the whole world. Well, now, wait a minute. Could that mean that some professing Christians are deceived? What does the verse say, friends? It says that, and the dragon, that great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. Hey, wait a minute. And God says that pretty much without exception. Except in his word, he also tells us when putting together the jigsaw puzzle, and you see a painting of an area of the picture here, and you see something else over there. We see elsewhere that it says God, during a spring harvest, is calling a few out of this world. But by and large, the great majority of the world is cut off from God since Adam and Eve ate that forbidden fruit. And they cut mankind off from God as Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, away from the tree of life, with two angels with flaming swords preventing them from going back in. And that was a judgment upon the whole world, with the exception of a very few whom the Bible explains God is calling to a spring harvest. So, with that in mind, considering that during this great tribulation, all those who take the mark of the beast will then suffer the seventh seal, the day of the Lord. Now, I'm kind of wanting to just hit the highlights for now. If you want the details, there are booklets that explain that. One book by Mr. Herbert Armstrong called The Book of Revelation Unveiled at Last will get you on the road to that. A book that is called The United States and the UK in Prophecy will be very helpful. Links to those booklets are on our website. From the homepage, from the main homepage, the menu there, you can go to a button called Library, and that takes you to links to other websites that have all these booklets available on them, and that I'm just making mention of here, friends, briefly. But the only way that compromise, some kind of resolution, will come between Ishmael, the Palestinians today, and Israel will not be by hard compromises occurring at a negotiation table. It's going to be after Jesus Christ returns and says to the Palestinians, look, and to everyone, you do it this way or you get no rain. You do it my way, Christ's way. One who sacrificed his life for all of us and who loves us. But let's finish up. I got to finish up, friends, and I'll finish up with the rest of this story from today's news. Jordan's UN ambassador, Dina Kawar, said the vote should not stop efforts to resolve the conflict. Any efforts to resolve that conflict are just going to be met with absolute frustration. It's just, we're going back 3,500 years. Animosity of 3,500 years is not going to, all the negotiation in the world's not going to resolve that. Whoever has the biggest stick's going to come out the winner. If it were up to man only, but it's not up to man only. And the point, one of the things I wanted to bring out was the fact that in Matthew, when I mentioned Matthew 24, verses 20, 21, 22, is that mankind left on its own would blow up mankind, and the only way mankind is going to have any future at all is because of Jesus Christ's return. We read in verse 21 of Matthew 24, Christ himself says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." And then notice in verse 22 he says, "And except those days be shortened," cut short, unless Christ were to intervene and return, "there should no flesh be saved alive." Mankind will just annihilate all mankind. But Christ says, though man could do that on his own, a few crazy lunatics get to the buttons that send off these nuclear weapons. It wouldn't take but a few of those aimed from one country to another, and the world is wiped out. But Christ finishes verse 22 by saying, "But for the elect's sake, those days shall be cut short." Now, if you understand, believe, and know that this is God's word and you believe it, there's a lot of comfort right there. A comfort from what people used to worry about during the Cold War. Would we need an underground shelter to keep from being blown up by Russia? And then those who came to understand certain prophecies came to see that, the ones who destroy the United States in the future, if the United States continues to disobey God, so that if by our continued disobedience God causes what he prophesied through Ezekiel in chapter 6, verse 6, to come to reality, where God through Ezekiel said, all your cities shall be laid waste. Now, that couldn't happen before the invention of nuclear weaponry. And the power of nuclear weaponry didn't come to a point where it could annihilate all mankind until 1955, when the hydrogen bomb, which the atomic bomb's only trigger for, was invented, created. We mentioned Russia. There are the 8 countries that voted in favor of that resolution that I just mentioned in the UN was Russia, China, France, Brother Reuben, Argentina, Chad, Chile, Jordan, and Luxembourg, another one of the brothers of the sons of Jacob, Israel. All those countries I just mentioned, friends, voted in favor of the UN resolution, in favor of the Palestinians. The U.S. and Australia voted against. The UK, Lithuania, Nigeria, the Republic of Korea, and Rwanda abstained. And we played the video already with Samantha Power saying that peace will come from hard choices and compromises. And I explained, sorry, Miss Power, there's a reason why that won't happen. But we do appreciate, for the time being, I know there's a lot of us who appreciate the United States powers voting against that resolution. Otherwise, things could come ratcheting down rather quickly, and they may yet anyway. But that document called for Israel to fully withdraw from all occupied Palestinian territories by the end of 2017, and for a comprehensive peace deal to be reached within a year. It also called for new negotiations to take place based on territorial lines that existed before Israel's occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip in the 1967 war. The vote was the culmination of 3 months of campaigning by the Palestinians at the UN. In a closed-door meeting of Arab states earlier on Tuesday, that was earlier today, all 22 envoys endorsed the call for a same-day vote on the draft. And friends, that's it for this Tuesday night report. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Wednesday night, with today's current news related to the Bible and prophecy, news which is getting more and more interesting and more relevant by the day. As we turn the pagan year date on our calendar to 2015, and that's only man's doing. That calendar is going to be done away when Jesus Christ returns. And the calendar that he instituted long ago, this holy sacred calendar, the Hebrew calendar, will be the calendar of the day and the calendar of the future for the rest of eternity once Jesus Christ returns. And things are escalating. Right now sometimes we have to cross-relate the Hebrew calendar dates with this pagan Roman calendar mess that we've all learned we have to live by. It's the calendar of the world because of the Roman Empire's influence over the world as it ruled the world. And even though it's in abyss right now, it's going to return. And it's got its calendar still intact that we are all enslaved by in a certain way. And we even, our reference like, hey, that's the end of our program for this Tuesday. Well, that's a name in part of a Roman god. Really, this is the 3rd day of the week. Sunday's the first day, Monday's the second day, Tuesday's the third day of the week, as God calls it. It's the evening and the morning were the third day. That's God's simple reference to what this part of the week is. It's the third day of the week. But we call it Tuesday. And tomorrow, the fourth day, we call Wednesday. And our program in many places begins a little bit after sunset. We're already the fourth day, and we have to work with that factor that man has decided to change the time when a day changes to midnight. He's changed it to midnight instead of sundown. And so that creates another complication in trying to cross-relate the Hebrew with this crazy pagan calendar of Rome. Thankfully, though, one thing, they haven't yet at least messed up the 7 days in a week factor element of God's calendar. But for the moment, because everybody does understand it, we'll leave it in this way. That's it for this Tuesday night edition of Nightcast. Again, God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again Wednesday night with the day's current world news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Thank you for joining me, friends. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying good night. So long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.